overnights.
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Yep, Thursday morning, time to have a chat to Leith Van Onselen from macrobusiness.com.au. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, good, thanks, Luke. Thanks for having me on again.
No, absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on again. Let's start off with inflation. We got the indicator, didn't we, this week, and it looked pretty good, down to 4.9%. Does that mean the RBA did the right thing?
Yeah, I think so. So basically, the ABS has like a quarterly, its main quarterly release that was released last month for June. Then it has its monthly indicator, which is sort of like a more timely, but not quite as broad, but a good indicator. And that basically came through yesterday at 4.9% year on year, and economists were tipping about 5.2, and the RBA expected higher than that as well. So basically, inflation is coming down faster than economists and the RBA think, which is a really good news. There are still a few pressure points that were highlighted. So as we know, rental prices, so property rents continue to rise at a swift pace. So that picked up to 7.6% year on year from 7.3% in June. So rents are still rising, and that'll continue to rise for months on end because the way the ABS measures it is different to how the private data providers like CoreLogic measure it, and it tends to be lagged. So we're going to still see more rental rises there. Also, electricity and gas prices went up have gone up since mid-year, obviously, when they passed on the utility price increases. So electricity prices are up 16% year on year, and it would have been more than that if there weren't sort of some rebates from state governments, etc. So there are still pressure points. And one of the factors that actually pulled down inflation was the fall in petrol prices over July. Now, as we all know, we're all paying about $2 to $2.20 at the moment. So that'll when August numbers come out, that'll actually push up inflation because petrol prices are rebounded. So it's not all one-way traffic, but it's but the signs are pretty good.
Okay, so that means no rate rise, you'd imagine, in September. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I couldn't see how they could lift it. We've got weaker than expected wage growth. We've got unemployment has risen more than expected, and also you've got softer inflation than expected. So pretty much all the main indicators are showing that the economy is slowing quicker than the RBA had forecast anyway, which means they should keep rates on hold.
Yeah. Now, we're being told to save water. Is that because of a pending El Nino, or they know something about, the lack of dams have actually worked out, gee, we don't really store enough of this stuff, so we've got to be careful? What's driving this warning?
Yeah, it was interesting. So Deloitte Access Economics released their weekly economic briefing this last week, actually it was. But and they basically said that Australians have got to learn to use less water to accommodate Australia's aggressive population expansion, read immigration, as well as climate change, which is going to reduce rainfall. So basically what they've said is we're going to have heaps more people coming to Australia, and we're also going to have less rainfall. So therefore we have to get used to using a lot less water to accommodate the extra people. Now, I'd personally, my counter to that is why are we growing the nation's population like a science experiment when we live on the driest continent on Earth? And, the last 3 years have obviously been pretty good on the rain front. We had La Nina and the negative dipole, I think they call it, Indian Ocean dipole. And what that meant was obviously, we all lived it. We got bombarded with rain for 3 years. Unfortunately, we've got the reverse of that now, and we've got El Nino and positive Indian Ocean dipole, they call it. And basically, the Bureau of Meteorology is tipping extremely dry and also hot spring and summer, and probably going to last for a few years. So we're going to have basically the reverse of what we had the last 3 years. And what this means is that in probably 3 or 4 years, we're going to be looking at the similar situation to what we had 4 years ago before we had the bushfires, when we had very low water supply and obviously drought conditions across the country. Now, the difference is we're going to have grown the population by, potentially a couple million by then, which is a couple million more mouths to provide water to, and means you're going to be in a worse situation. Now, the ultimate end game for this is if we keep doing what we're doing, is we're going to have to keep building, loads of water desalination plants across the nation, which are incredibly expensive. Desalinated water costs about 5 times as much as dam water. Yeah. And what this means is that they're going to use a lot of energy because you've got to pump the water uphill. So if you live in Western Sydney, 50 k's from the from the ocean, you're going to have to pump that water uphill 50 kilometres, which takes a hell of a lot of power. And basically, the Infrastructure Australia projected in 2017 that basically with all these desalination plants and climate change, household water bills are going to rise fourfold over 60 years. So basically, fourfold, yeah. So they tipped in real terms, $1,226 was their figure in 2017, and that's going to rise to $6,000 in 2017 money, so not in 2067 money.
Yeah.
By 2067. So that's obviously going to be pretty hard if you're a low income earner. You're going to be paying a lot more for your water, probably paying a lot more for your electricity and everything else to accommodate effectively this huge increase in the population that nobody really voted for or really wants. So it's pretty stupid. Like why are we growing the population so quickly in the driest continent on Earth when we don't have enough water supply really to accommodate the current population?
And why do we sit back during a triple La Nina? Why do we sit back
and not build any
watch
dams?
all that rain and then watch it flow into the ocean? I mean, it's just it's stupidity. And then we come to a situation where, again, the climate change excuse, right? Everyone's got to wash less, drink less, water less. I mean, goodness me.
Yeah, and there is a broader issue at work here, Luke. The 2021 State of the Environment report, which is released by the federal government, it's done by a panel of experts, environmental experts, etc. They actually they said in that report, and they've said it in the previous 5 reports before that population growth has a very significant impact on the environment. Shock horror. It's actually the biggest driver of, I guess, environmental degradation. That's front and center in their report, and yet every time they release this report, it's basically like the intergenerational report of the environment.
Okay.
It gets ignored, and we keep running these very high population growth policies, and then just say, oh, net zero, and it's all we can just forget about it. Whereas really, like the actual report, the State of the Environment report that comes out every 5 years, basically says that population growth impacts everything to do with the environment, and has a very high impact on the environment. And you can see it here with the water supply, and you see it with everything else, like land clearing and all the other stuff. And yet it's always ignored. Nobody talks about it. And even, the so-called environmental party, the Greens, don't discuss it. They always really just lobby for more. So it's kind of a diabolical situation we've got here. And it's a bit like a slow motion, car crash. You can see it coming. We're going to have an incredibly dry period, and we're going to have basically the same problem we had 4 years ago, but potentially worse because we're going to have millions more people, which makes the problem worse.
Isn't it amazing? We have people arrive from, let's say, low emissions per capita countries, and they come to Australia. They're welcomed here, obviously, to a high emission per capita country. And you're right, the Greens, I mean, they should be forefront of this debate. The outcome is higher emissions, and they just sit there and go, they sit there and say nothing.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's not even the emissions. It's not even the emissions. I mean, the emissions is just one small aspect of the environment. Everything else, you got native flora and fauna loss. You've got obviously tree clearing. You got land clearing. You got all the other stuff. Waste. Obviously, you're going to grow the population by over 14 million people, like the Intergeneration report says.
Yeah.
You're going to have to clear a hell of a lot of land, fell a lot of trees, and you're going to create a hell of a lot of waste.
Yeah.
And that sort of stuff. So, emissions is only one small part of it. And even that whole net zero thing is delusional. If we're going to grow the population by 14 plus million people over 40 years, we're never going to meet net zero. It's not possible. Let alone all the other environmental damages, and we're certainly not going to meet net zero when you've got to build desal plants everywhere, which use a hell of a lot of energy, just to provide enough water.
And we're not going to meet net zero if we come up with this idea of the great big battery in the snowy mountains, and it has blowouts in cost and in time to completion. I mean, every time they make a prediction around this, you could nearly safely sit back and say, right, they've got that wrong by half. It'll be at least double the cost and take twice as long. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, you probably actually say triple. Like I know, I live in Danistan, Victoria, under Dan Andrews, and pretty much every single major infrastructure project he's announced or whatever has blown out like you would not believe. And basically, the state's almost on, it's almost approaching sort of bankrupt status at the moment.
Yeah.
And God knows how Victoria's going to cope with the projected population projections from in the generation report. If we get that, when we can't even provide enough infrastructure or housing or anything else for the population we've got. So, it's similar in Sydney, but it's even worse in Melbourne because we're growing even faster. So,
indeed.
Look, the whole thing just doesn't make sense.
No.
And I think Albo's got to come out and explain how we're going to magically meet net zero, provide enough water, etc., under his big Australia that he wants.
Yeah, if you can find time away from arguing for the Voice to explain that to us, I think a lot of people would be delighted to hear from him. Macrobusiness.com.au. Check it out every day. We do. Leith Van Onselen, good on you, mate. Talk to you next week.
Yeah, thanks, Luke.